Hello. Running commentary. Chaim Olivsky here. Running commentary 112. It's a beautiful experience seeing how the Rebbe takes somewhat of a boring account of journeys in the desert, stops and starts, traveling and encampments, just the words, the names of the places, and he brings it to life and light and relevance in our daily life. So, as we all know, the stories of the Torah are not just stories, they're guides for life and also parallel things in our daily life and in our historical journey as a Jewish people. So here we have one framework in which we see a story of an account in the Torah of 3 journeys, 3 stops, and their relevance and significance in our lives today. Fascinating take. And it goes like this. This is in last week's Parsha, Masei, where it talks about the journeys. And it talks about how the Jewish people left Egypt. They left Mitzrayim. From when they left Egypt until they got to the splitting of the sea, there were 3 stops. So they left Egypt. It says, Vayisu me Ramses. They left a place called Ramses. They stopped in Esam, and they stopped in Piachiros. So there was 3 journeys. I'm sorry, in Sukkot. Vayisu me Ramses. They stopped in Sukkot, then Esam, then Piachiros. 3 journeys. So the Rebbe, and then there was the splitting of the sea. So in Egypt, they were in bondage and slavery. Wasn't fun. The redemption of Egypt was completed at the splitting of the sea, at which they saw God's light, and they saw the Egyptians dead, literally. So the Rebbe says that this paradigm of the redemption being completed at the splitting of the sea from leaving Egypt until the splitting of the sea, we have that in our personal story, also in our personal story lives, and also in our collective global existence as the Jewish people. And he goes as follows. And it's known that the journeys in the Torah, there are 42 stops that the Torah recounts, and each of them are some stop in our life. Each of them is a story in our life. I don't know all 42, but we're just going to go with the first 3 here that are actually from before they actually hit the desert. So it goes like this. Just to repeat the names of the places. They left Ramses, they went to Sukkot, that's journey number 1. From Sukkot, they went to Esam, that's journey number 2. From Esam, they went to Piachiros, that's journey number 3. So the Rebbe says that if you look in Rashi, the very first commentary on the Parsha of Masei, on the journeys, Rashi asks, why is the Torah recounting the names of the places that the Jewish people camped and stopped at and journeyed from and to? What's its significance to them or to us? And Rashi quotes a midrash, Rabbi Tanchuma, who says that this is analogical. This is similar to a king whose son was ill and needed healing in a faraway country. So the king took him to the place to be healed. On their way back, the king noted and mentioned, 3 things. Rashi quotes from the Medrash Tanchuma. Here we slept. Kan yashanu. Here we slept. Number 2, kan hokarnu. Here we cooled ourselves off. It was cold, it was hot, we cooled ourselves off. 3, kan chashashta es roshcha. Here you had a headache. Your head wasn't working well, your head wasn't feeling well. 3 things. That's what Rashi says. Now the Rebbe brilliantly connects the 3 first stops of the Jewish people before they arrived at the splitting of the sea, and he connects it to these 3 places, just practically speaking, not very spiritual. And he says as follows. He says, when the Jewish people left Egypt, on their journey to leaving Egypt, before they hit the desert, there were these 3 journeys. The first stop was Sukkos. The Torah described that they left in the middle of the day, and they arrived when it was still daylight to Sukkos. So what did they need the sukkah for? Sukkos means huts. They actually needed it for sleeping. It was like their tent. So Sukkos was their sleeping. Similar to the first stop that Rashi quotes from the Midrash, that the king said to his son, Kan yashanu. Here we slept. Then moving on, from Sukkos to Esam. They traveled during the day and a little bit at night, but they didn't travel the whole time. And the Torah describes how God already prepared for them the 2 guides that were present during the day, and the pillar of fire that was present at night to guide them. And the Rebbe asks, what did they need? Well, the Medrash tells us what was the function of the clouds of glory aside from the guiding and telling them the path to go. What did it do when they were just resting, when they were sitting during the day, which happened during this week when they weren't traveling? So the Midrash says, the Torah relates that the clouds would level the land, would prepare the path. It would, if there were hills in the way, in the path, it would level them. If there were dips, pits, inclines, it would flatten them out to make the walking easier. Well, clouds would also protect the Jewish people from the nechashim, from the snakes and scorpions and all the dangerous desert life insects and creepy crawly things. However, asks the Rebbe, at this time, when they were provided this cloud of glory, they weren't in the desert. I don't know how to straighten this out. They weren't in the desert. They were just leaving Egypt. They were still in Egypt, but they didn't reach the desert, so they didn't need the leveling of the land. There were pathways, there were roads, and they didn't have snakes and scorpions in their path. So what was the cloud doing? Says the Rebbe, there's another Midrash that tells us that the clouds also protected the Jewish people from the weather elements, from the heat of the sun. It protected them, it shaded them from the sun. So here too, says the Rebbe, in this stretch from Sukkos to Esam, the only function that the cloud did, or that was needed, was to protect them from the heat of the sun. And that is the second stop that the king mentioned to his son, Kan Hokarnu. Here we cooled ourselves off. Number 3, Piachiros. The third stop was Piachiros. The Torah describes that in Piachiros, the Jewish people complained with a logical, cognitively excusable complaint. And they said, Egypt was tough. It was not good. There's a lot of slavery there. the desert over here is going to kill us. Sorry. Trying to fix this gimbal over here, which is a little bit lopsided. I can't figure out how to fix it. Yeah. So he says the desert life was they complained that which was worse? Why did you bring us out from the slavery of Egypt to die, for us to die in the desert? Which is worse, death or slavery? Well, it was a calculated complaint, whether it was logical or correct logic or not. It was a calculated complaint, and therefore, says Rashi, says the Rebbe, this was where the king mentioned to the son, Kan Chashashta es Roshcha. This is where the Jewish people collectively, their head was hurting, which means to say that they used their logic in an erroneous way, in a negative way. Okay, so that's the regular stuff. That's the pshat. Now we're going to go on and dig a little deeper. And the Rebbe says that these three stops are a paradigm also to our regular life, personal and global. And as follows. It gets a little mystical, but here's how it starts. He says, Kan Yashanu, here we slept. And these are all, remember, these three stops are, and they are just like they were in the original, where they needed these three stops before they reached the splitting of the sea, which was the culmination and the completion of their redemption from Egypt. So too we need these three stops in our exile now, in our life, till we get to Mashiach. And what are they? Three stops are as follows. Kan Yashanu, here we slept. The Rebbe says for a soul to come down into this world, it's in heaven, it's a great powerful light, and for it to come down, it actually, it's put to sleep a little bit. Not the whole great light of the soul, doesn't come down. I'm trying to figure out this gimbal and it's not working. Okay, so that's the concept of sleeping, where the soul is a little bit of space for anything, which he did. That was called the tzimtzum. So that is also, where in a global sense, Kan Yashanu, here we slept. And the Rebbe noticed, fascinatingly also, that if you see in the words that the king used, that the Midrash says, there's three stops. Oh, looks like we disconnected there for a minute. But thank God it's back. Okay, I don't know where it was. There were three stops, and two of them the king mentioned in plural form. Kan Yashanu, here we slept. Kan Hokarnu, here we cooled off. And then the third one, Kan Chashashta es Roshcha, here you had a headache. It's only singular. And this actually fits well with what the Rebbe explains is our mission and the global story of these journeys. So the Rebbe says that the neshama coming down to the world and God creating the world is a form of sleep. That's one thing. But then in order for it to function, in order for things to work well for God and for us, Kan Hokarnu, this restriction needs to cool down a little bit. God needs to release more light, which is cooling off the restriction that he had in the creation and giving more power to the neshama, to the soul, to function for its mission. So in mystical terms, God needed to add mercy and mission to the restriction of his light. And this concept of restriction in Hebrew is called gevura. And gevura, strength, is compared to the sun, which is a strong power. And over here, the Rebbe says, Kan Hokarnu, when we come down to this world, this restriction, or to create this world, the restriction has to be relaxed. It has to be cooled off. And finally, the last point, Kan, chashashta, esroshcha. Here, you had a headache. Says the Rebbe, this is a parallel to when a child grows up and becomes bar or bat mitzvah, and they become responsible, knowledgeable enough, their head is working enough to be responsible, to fulfill, to observe, to fulfill God's Torah and to live an observant life. And then God throws us challenges, right, left, and center, in order to strengthen us. But sometimes it happens where we know the Torah says, I'm setting before you as a chayim v'tatov, life and the good, as a maves v'sara, death and the evil, uvacharta b'chayim, please choose life. Although we know that, but sometimes our mind is not functioning well enough or strong enough to control our feelings and our actions, and we transgress. We don't do exactly what God wants us to do. So here, says the Rebbe, this is where the king says to his son, Kan chashashta es rosha. Here, your head was hurting. Your head wasn't working to the full extent where it could and should to prevent you from doing the wrong thing and guiding you from doing the right thing. These are the 3 steps. Simple journeys. Fascinating how the Rebbe takes us 3 stops in the desert, or before the desert actually, from Egypt to the splitting of the sea, and shows how the Midrash and Rashi and God through the Torah are really telling us 3 levels and 3 aspects of our life, personal and global, after which Mashiach will come. May it happen today. That's my story. God bless you. Sorry for the choppiness, both in the content and in the visuals.